Thanks, Pastor Sam. As you can tell, we coordinated outfits today. Even down to the shoes. Like, how cool is that? Hey, love seeing the Oilers jerseys. Love the faith, everybody. Great job. Well, hey, welcome once again. Sam said, my name is Tim. I get to be part of the team here at Life Church. I love serving here and being part of this family. And if you are here today, or if you're joining us online for the very first time, you've caught us in our series in James. And it's been great so far. Just to catch up a little bit, James, it's a book in the Bible. It was written by James, good. And now James was the brother of Jesus. And which raises such a really cool question. I love this question. And that is, what would it take for your brother to believe that you were God? And the answer to that question is, well, no, nothing, right? I have a brother, and I'm absolutely convinced he is not God. I have two sisters as well, and they may tell you that I'm pretty awesome. I'm kind and generous. I try to be wise. I help out. Pretty easy to talk to. But they would tell you that they are convinced I am not God. And maybe you have some siblings in your family. Maybe your testimony would be different. Probably not. But James had come to the realization and faith that he believed his big brother, Jesus, who had come first, was indeed the Son of God. And he put his faith in him. And that's just so amazing. I find that just so amazing. James has come into being a leader in first century Jerusalem. In fact, he would be like the pastor of the church in Jerusalem, or one of the leaders. And history tells us, tradition tells us, that in about the year 62, James was thrown off the temple and martyred for his faith, because he was so convinced that his big brother Jesus was God. Now, this book is such an amazing book, and if you've been able to be with us, you've been hearing some of this incredibly good practical wisdom that James gives us. And in fact, if you've missed any of those talks to this point, please go to our website, welcomelife.church. Up in the top right, there's something that says media. You can click on that, or if you have a phone, there's a bit of a burger there. You can click on it, select media. You'll see all of our playlists from all of our messages, but James is right there. Click on that, and you can catch up on all this incredible practical wisdom that James gives us. Now, he writes this book, and this is cool too. In fact, James had a nickname. He was called James the Just, because he was just so just and just so full of wisdom. And he writes this book to the early Jewish Christian primarily, but now it just kind of goes through the centuries, and now we get to read it and glean from that same incredible wisdom. Now, here's something else to think about. If believing something was enough to make a difference, just think of how much easier, how much different our lives would be. I mean, what if just simply believing everything you've heard about nutrition and exercise and eating right would make a difference? Just think of how much easier things would be, right? How about addictions? Addictions would just kind of go away, because we all believe addictions are bad, right? They ruin our relationships, and they ruin health. They impact families, and just they do so many bad things. But if we just believed, if that was just enough, that addictions were bad, just think of how much easier that would be. Or how about finances? I mean, if we all just believed that saving money and spending less than we make, maybe investing some, if that's all it took, just think of how much better our lives would be, right? How about school, or how about work? I mean, we all know that it's important to study and prepare, correct? And but what if just simply believing that all it took was all it took to doing well? I mean, wouldn't life be just so much easier, maybe better? Truth is, most of us know the right stuff. And most of us have some knowledge in how to live our lives well, and how to be productive. But the problem, I think, for most of us is not the problem of lack of information. To be honest, we all know it's important to forgive. It's important to be honest. It's important to be compassionate. And for most of us, we know what we need to know, but the reality is, and you know this, that simply knowing and believing really doesn't make any difference. Because if that were the case, our lives would be different, right? Our relationships would be better. Finances would be better. We'd be better off in almost every single area. And if you really think about it, most of us have never met anybody who has failed at something for lack of believing what they need to know. I mean, obviously there's certain things that we don't know, but it's so easy in today's age to find out what we need to know. There's Dr. Google and now AI. It's easy to find out what we don't need to know. Whenever I need to fix my car, I'm on YouTube searching that out. Or if I don't know how to do something around the house. The other day, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but it's true. I was bundling up some branches in my yard, and I thought, okay, how do I tie the best knots? Silly, but I looked it up. I found out what I needed to know. Truth is, and again, you know this, we fail because it's doing, not knowing, that ultimately makes all the difference. Most of us have a tablet or a phone or some kind of mobile device around your house. I did a little research on this, and this is an old stat, but I found it interesting. In 2021, so about 4 years ago, a study was done, and it was found that 93.9 households have at least one mobile device in their home. In my house, we're above average. We have a couple phones, a couple tablets, we have some old ones. And, they're great tools, right? They're powerful devices. I mean, my phone is my Bible. It's my map. It's a research tool. I can scan. I can plot out a room. I can scan a QR code. They're incredible, incredible, incredible tools. But you know this. Until you click on an app, it's just a great, fancy, expensive piece of plastic and titanium and unhardened glass, right? Because application is everything. The same is true when it comes to our faith. But even worse than that is that even if we believe all the right things and we can gain all the right information, all the right knowledge, until we utilize and we do what we know, our faith essentially becomes ineffective and powerless. And James, with all his wisdom, with all his knowledge and insight, he's about to address this issue with the early church. This is what he writes. He says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith," or maybe perhaps a better way of saying this is if you've decided to believe and if you've decided to follow Jesus, what good is it if you decide to do that, if you decide to believe, but you don't show it by your actions? This is so remarkable, folks. This is so amazing. This was written a couple thousand years ago. But it's as relevant today as when James put it to paper 2,000 years ago. He's talking about a tension that we who are church people, who are followers of Jesus, sometimes have, and that they had back then as they're starting to figure things out. And that tension is that once we become followers of Jesus, and choose to believe, in fact, that Jesus was who he said he was, that he was God, what we do doesn't reflect the person we claim to be following. And for so many of us, probably nobody here today, but for so many of us, it's so tempting to believe that the journey of following Jesus completes after the decision to follow Jesus. That the climax of following Jesus was completed when you made the initial decision. And now your plan is just to kind of coast along and just kind of live life, maybe into heaven. Or maybe as a Jesus follower, you feel that you've stalled out somehow, that you thought it was going to be so much more amazing, and it's just kind of dull. Or maybe why you're struggling in your faith journey, or maybe even to the obstacle to following Jesus at all, is that you've experienced people who claim to be Jesus followers but don't really act like Jesus at all. And what James is about to do is to challenge the early followers of Jesus, and why this is just so incredibly important. It's so rich in wisdom, is that faith in Jesus is just the starting point. Hear me, it's just the starting point. It's the root. It gets you in the door. But just like our phones, until you apply it, until you do something with it, it's useless. Application, that's what makes the difference. Application is everything. And then James drops this incredibly loaded question, and don't miss this. Don't miss this. And essentially what he's saying is he's setting up, he's saying, brothers and sisters, all you do is enter the door. All you do is gather around the door jambs and the vestibules. If that's all that you do, if you never proceed past the entry point, he asks this question. He says, can that kind of faith save anyone? And now what we don't see in the text, but the early Jewish Christian would have totally understood, was that under the old system, the Mosaic law that they had all just come out of being under, the temple model, before Jesus, the evidence of being a God follower was something called circumcision. How many thought you would hear a sermon about circumcision this morning? But this is important. Because in that day, circumcision was the shorthand between the old promise God made between himself and mankind. But it was invisible to the public. It was kind of a once and done. It was only for males. And it was decided by the parents of when it was going to be done. But folks, when Jesus died for us, his death ushered in this brand new reality of how humanity can have relationship with a loving Heavenly Father. And as a result, things changed. Things became different. And for those of us who have decided to follow Jesus, there's actually a new evidence. And Jesus let us know what this evidence is. This is what Jesus taught. He said this. Look up here. He said, okay, we won't look up there. Love each other. He said, just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. The mark of being a Jesus follower, folks, is different. It's visible. It's public. It involves daily decisions. It's not gender specific. And while it doesn't require any surgery, it's still painful. It requires sacrifice because love always requires sacrifice. Sacrifice is always a little bit painful. And James understood that faith without an expression of love, that kind of faith only leads to this sense of moral superiority. And I know this is kind of hard to hear, but if your faith doesn't feel obligated to express itself through love, but rather through this sense of obligation or even religious routine, that kind of faith doesn't have any substance, according to James. And maybe some of you have experienced that story. Maybe it's your story. Maybe your experience is that when you feel that when you do something that you would consider religious, you go to church or you pray, you kind of get this mark or gold star. You pray every day. Or if you do something bad, it's kind of like God looks down and now you get a debit instead of a credit. But because you kind of do all the right things, and because you're essentially a good person because you do all the right things, for you, that's a viable example that you have faith. And what James is doing is he's arguing that following Jesus, that being a Jesus follower is so much different than that. In fact, it's so much better than that. It's so much more meaningful than that. That it's faith expressing itself, working itself out through expressions of love. That's what James is teaching. Then he sets up an illustration. And he argues that if you see a brother or sister, and that's such an interesting thing for James to say. Because the words that James is using here just doesn't indicate a sibling. If you dig into it, what it means is a fellow believer. Or James is referencing somebody in your local community, or it could be a neighbor, but anybody that's in your sphere of influence. That's what James is referring to here. And then when he says the words that he uses for food and clothing, this is so interesting because you don't see this unless you kind of dig into it a little bit. By clothing, he means if you're down to your underwear. That's what he's saying here. And by food, what he's saying, if you don't have enough resources to make it through the day. So what James is saying, if there's anybody within your sphere of influence that's down to their underwear, that doesn't have enough resources to make it through the day, and you can't show and extend them some love, he said that kind of faith is dead and it's useless. What James is telling the early followers of Jesus, and ultimately to us, is that believing is a great first step. It gets you in the door. But until you move past the door frame, until you start applying that faith through expressions of love, there's just no evidence. And you're missing the point. That kind of faith, James says, is useless. Think of it this way. Faith without love in action is easy to resist. James isn't done. He continues and he says this. He says, now someone may argue. Now, we don't know who that someone was. The Bible doesn't really give any indication. It's quite likely that James is drawing from some kind of personal experience. Maybe it's something that's happened to him personally. That somebody in his orbit, somebody in his sphere of influence has questioned him on what faith really is. And it's kind of like somebody is saying James, buddy, you don't know my situation. You don't know what I'm going through. You don't know my circumstances. So this is what we'll do, James. You just do you, and I'll do me. You go in your way, I'll do my way. We'll all believe happy together. We'll all be good, and we'll just do our own thing. But James is like, dude, you're missing the point. You're completely missing the point. In fact, he says this. He says, how can you show me your faith unless you have good deeds? Or, how can you show me your faith if you don't have expressions of love? Or maybe even simpler than that, you could say, how can you say you are a follower of Jesus if there's no evidence? Because it just doesn't work that way. James says, I will show you my faith by my good deeds. And he says, if you have faith, or you say you have faith, you believe that there is one God. And remember, faith is great. It gets you in the door. It gets things started. James says, good for you, or great. That's a great first start. That's how it begins. He says, even the demons believe this. And not only do they believe this, James says, he says that they tremble in terror. Or maybe another way of looking at it is that even in the supernatural realm, authentic belief has an evidence. And the point James is driving home to those early followers of Jesus, and now to us, is that the mark of following Jesus is faith expressing itself and working itself out through love. Because why? Application is everything. Application is everything. And if faith doesn't have evidence, this is what James, in all of his wisdom, is saying. He's saying, how foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? It's useless. James is teaching the early believer and to us that if you've come to experience the love of God in your life, but there's no evidence of extending that love towards others, because that's a problem. Because you can't separate faith and its response. Application is everything. Application makes all the difference. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatian church, said it this way. He said, what is important is faith expressing itself in love. Why? Because actions make your faith complete. Actions make your faith complete. James says his actions made his faith complete. And ultimately, James is inviting us to apply our faith, because when there is application, folks, something happens. And James says that when there's application, this is why it's everything. It's our faith, our relationship with our Heavenly Father. It becomes deeper, it becomes more complete, it becomes more meaningful. Takes a step forward, it becomes stronger. And it becomes a foundation, a better foundation for when things go wrong, and they will go wrong. When things get tough, and they will get tough, you have a foundation in your life to carry you through, to support you. Application is everything. So as we begin to land this morning, I really want to leave you with a question. And what my request is of you is to take this question and ask yourself it over and over and over. I wish it was original with me, because it's such a great question. But I came across it a number of years ago, and I ask myself this question all the time. And it's a question that if you meditate on it regularly, I'm convinced that it has the power to change the way that you think, and ultimately how you bring application into following Jesus. And as you go out through your week this week, I would love to hear how this manifests in your life. Please email me. Please let me know, because I'd love to rejoice with you and celebrate with you as to how faith comes to application, or how you apply your faith in Jesus. I'd love to hear it. Email me here at the church. I'd love to hear it. Remember, Jesus said this. He said, and we looked at it already, but Jesus said that we are to love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love one another. And that your love for one another will what? It will prove to the world, to those around us, that you are my disciples. That's what Jesus said. Application is everything. And James understood that Jesus didn't just want people to believe something. Jesus wanted us to do something. And he taught us that people will know that we love him by loving those around us. And you know, Jesus, even though he was 100% God, he was God in the flesh, he never leveraged his equality with the Father. He never leveraged that. What he leveraged was his love for us. He modeled love, and this was so extraordinary. Jesus teaches that in the same measure he has loved us and extended love to us, he asks us to extend that grace and to that love to everybody within our sphere of influence. Paul put it this way in Philippians chapter 2. He said this, though he was God, he, or Jesus, did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privilege. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Jesus leveraged his love, and you know what? He compels us to do the very same thing. And if you remember this account remember the account where he asked his disciples to show love to those around him. If you remember that story, it was just a few hours after that Jesus is arrested and then stages this incredible demonstration of love that literally takes their breath away by dying on a cross for you, for me. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, there's always going to be things that we don't know. But the thing about application is that our lack of knowledge doesn't impede our capacity to love. And that so beautifully sets us up for this question that I want to leave with you. And here it is. What does love require of me? Think about it. What does love require of me? Whatever situation you find yourself in this week, or maybe even right now, what does love require of you? Apostle Paul teaches that love, it requires patience, that it's not pushy. It requires that I move at your pace rather than you to move at mine. It requires kindness, and that we loan our strength to those around us rather than remind them of their weaknesses. It's doing for others what they can't do for themselves. Love requires that we keep envy and our pride from interfering with our ability to celebrate the success of others. And that we're not threatened when somebody else around us gets things that we don't. Love doesn't create regrets, and it doesn't create selfishness. It's not self-seeking, and it puts the interests of others first. It requires that we address our frustrations and our anger in private rather than spilling it out to those around us. It requires us to forgive and to keep no records of wrongs. It requires us to see and believe the best while choosing to let the rest go. It doesn't smuggle harmful things into the relationship. It always protects. When two people or two parties embrace this approach, it's amazing what happens. And there's virtually no obstacle that can't be overcome. Love doesn't seek to win arguments. It seeks to protect the relationship. Folks, application is everything. And you know what I've discovered? And you know this. People don't tend to resist being loved. What they tend to resist is judgment, condemnation, guilt. And ultimately, that's why it's so hard for Jesus to be resisted, because he is the embodiment of love. It's why he came. And when you're unsure of what to say or how to act or to what to do, ask yourself, what does love require of me? What does love require of me? Jesus went to the cross on our behalf because he so loved us. And James is saying, folks, don't let your faith be useless. Don't let your faith be useless. Don't let it be meaningless. Let it mean something. Let it mean something. Faith without the expression of love is useless. And that's where we'll pick up things next week. Let me pray for you this morning. Lord, it's so amazing to think that you loved us so much that you came to this planet with the intention of revealing to us how much you loved us. It's amazing. We're humbled by it. Father, for those of us here that need to grow in that this morning, I pray, Jesus, they would just feel your incredible love upon their lives. I pray, Lord, you would open up the floodgates of heaven and just surround them. Father, as we go throughout our weeks, Lord, in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, would you remind us of that reality that you love us? And would you remind us, Lord, and help us to ask the question, Lord, how can we extend that love to others around us? We love you, and you're so amazing. And we love you. In your name, Jesus, we pray.